The Grand Hall of the Zarelian Dominion was a place of power, respect, and fear. Its massive pillars stretched high into the sky, glowing with ancient carvings that told stories of Zarelian victories. In the center of the hall, beneath the golden banners of the Dominion, stood Commander Velas, a warrior of great honor. She was tall, strong, and dressed in the shining armor of her people. Her deep violet eyes glowed with confidence as she looked down at the humans standing before her. The hall was filled with Zarelian warriors, diplomats, and nobles, all watching with amusement. They had gathered to witness yet another display of their superiority. Humans were a young race in the galaxy, and to the Zarelians, they were weak. They did not have the strength of warriors, the size of giants, or the wisdom of the ancients. What could they possibly offer? Velas crossed her arms and smirked. "You are inferior, human," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "You should accept your place beneath us." The Zarelians in the hall chuckled, their deep voices mixing like rolling thunder. To them, this was not an insult, it was simply the truth. But Ethan Carter, the human diplomat, did not react the way they expected. He did not look down in shame. He did not argue in anger. Instead, he smiled, a calm, knowing smile that made Velez's confidence falter for just a second. Then he spoke. "Yet, here I stand." The laughter stopped. A strange silence fell over the hall. Velez narrowed her eyes. "You stand because we allow it. Do not mistake mercy for strength." Ethan tilted his head slightly, his blue eyes steady. "Is that what you believe?" He took a slow step forward. "If we are so inferior, why do you fear our progress? Why do you try to control us instead of ignoring us?" Murmurs spread through the Zarelian crowd. It was a small question, but it struck like a blade. Velez scoffed, though the confidence in her eyes dimmed just a little. "Fear. We do not fear humans. You are insignificant." Ethan smiled again. "If we were insignificant, we wouldn't be having this conversation." For the first time, Velez felt something she did not expect. Uncertainty. She had fought in many battles, stood against the greatest warriors of the Dominion, and never once had she doubted her people's strength. But this human, he did not speak like a defeated race. He did not act like someone seeking approval. He acted like someone who knew something they did not. A Zarelian noble stepped forward, his golden robe sweeping across the polished floor. "Enough of this pointless talk," he said. "Humans have yet to prove themselves worthy. Words mean nothing." Velez straightened her posture and nodded. "That is true. If you wish to challenge our views, human, then do it in a way that matters. Face a test. Our test. Prove your worth." The hall erupted in approval. The Zarelians loved challenges. It was their way of life. If Ethan truly believed humanity was equal to them, he would have to prove it. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And what kind of test do you have in mind?" Velez's smirk returned. "The crucible." A ripple of excitement spread through the room. The crucible was an ancient test of skill, intelligence, and endurance. It was used to train Zarelian warriors, to push them beyond their limits. No outsider had ever attempted it. No alien had ever survived it. Velez crossed her arms. "You will undergo the same trials that our greatest warriors face. If you succeed, the Dominion will recognize humanity as equals. If you fail, you will accept your inferiority and leave in silence." Ethan considered the offer. He was not a soldier, not a warrior like the Zarelians. But humanity's strength had never been in muscle alone. It was in adaptability, intelligence, and resilience. After a moment, he nodded. "I accept." A loud cheer erupted from the Zarelians, though most were laughing. They did not believe he would last even a single round. Velez leaned closer, her voice low but firm. "You have made a foolish choice, human. The crucible is not a place for weakness." Ethan met her gaze without fear. "We'll see." And with that, the challenge was set. The test that would decide humanity's fate in the eyes of the Zarelian Dominion was about to begin. The grand hall of the Zarelian Dominion was still filled with the echoes of laughter as Ethan Carter walked out, his posture calm, his expression unreadable. The challenge had been set. The crucible, the test of warriors, the ultimate trial of strength and intelligence. No human had ever attempted it. No non-Zarelian had ever survived it. Commander Velez watched him leave, a smirk playing on her lips. She had seen many warriors tremble before the crucible, even Zarelians. This human, so calm, so sure of himself, was walking toward his downfall. A fellow Zarelian warrior, Captain Dren, stepped beside her. "He will not last 5 minutes," Dren said confidently. Velez nodded, but deep inside, something unsettled her. It was not the human's arrogance. It was the certainty in his eyes. The next morning, the great arena of the crucible was packed with spectators. Zarelians filled the seats, eager to witness what they believed would be a quick defeat. Large screens displayed the 3 stages of the test: tactics, endurance, and the final choice. Ethan stood at the entrance, dressed in a simple black uniform. A Zarelian attendant adjusted a small neural link device on his temple. It would connect him to the crucible's advanced simulation, where the trials would take place. Velez stepped forward, her voice strong. "The crucible has no mercy. It was designed to test the greatest warriors of the Dominion. Do you understand what you have accepted, human?" Ethan gave a small smile. "Completely." She frowned. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't even hesitating. With a wave of her hand, the trial began. The first trial. Tactics. The moment the test started, Ethan found himself inside a battlefield simulation. The environment around him shifted, becoming a vast, war-torn landscape. Above him, Zarelian battle drones hovered, scanning the terrain. The challenge was simple: defeat the enemy force before they defeat you. The Zarelians had programmed a perfect enemy, a digital army trained to predict every move, to counter every strategy. It had been designed to test Zarelian generals, who relied on brute force and overwhelming numbers to win. Ethan, however, did not fight like a Zarelian. As soon as the simulation began, he did not charge forward like expected. Instead, he vanished into the battlefield's ruins, using the terrain to his advantage. He moved quickly, using hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and unpredictable maneuvers. The Zarelian spectators watched in confusion. "Why is he not attacking head-on?" one warrior asked. "He is hiding," another scoffed. "A coward's strategy." But Velez's eyes narrowed. She saw what was happening. "He's not hiding. He's hunting." Minutes passed. The enemy forces, unable to predict Ethan's movements, fell one by one. Instead of facing them in direct combat, he was controlling the battlefield, forcing them into traps, cutting off their supplies, confusing their sensors. Then, in a final brilliant move, Ethan hacked into the simulation's command system, using the very technology Zarelians had built against them. The battle was over. He had won. The arena fell silent. The Zarelians who had been laughing before were now watching with uncertain expressions. Velez clenched her fists. This was not supposed to happen. The second trial. Endurance. No human had ever faced the endurance trial, and for good reason. Zarelians were built for extreme conditions. They could survive intense heat, bitter cold, and tremendous physical strain. Humans, in comparison, were fragile. The simulation changed, transporting Ethan into a deadly environment, a burning desert, where the ground itself cracked with heat. Above him, a merciless sun blazed, draining energy with every passing second. The only way to survive was to reach an oasis on the other side of the wasteland. Velez watched closely. She knew this would be the end. No human could last more than an hour in this trial. Ethan did not run like the Zarelians before him. He did not rush forward in desperation. Instead, he observed. He adapted. He moved carefully, walking in the shadows of dunes to avoid direct sunlight. He conserved his energy, breathing in slow, measured intervals. He even used small survival tricks, covering his skin with dust to reflect heat, finding moisture in unexpected places. Hours passed. Xyrelians in the crowd began shifting uncomfortably. He should have collapsed by now. But he kept moving. Slow, steady, smart. When Ethan finally reached the oasis, he was exhausted but still standing. The Xyrelians, who had expected him to fail, now watched in uneasy silence. Velez exhaled, trying to ignore the strange feeling growing inside her. This human was different. The third trial, the final choice. The last stage of the crucible was not about physical strength. It was about judgment. Ethan now stood in a dark, silent room. In front of him were two doors. A deep voice echoed. One door leads to survival. The other leads to death. Choose wisely. A simple choice, or so it seemed. Xyrelians always failed this test. They relied on instinct, on force, on the belief that strength alone would carry them forward. But the test was designed to prove a harsh truth. Sometimes neither choice was correct. Ethan stood still. He did not rush to pick a door. He studied the walls, the floor, the very air around him. Then something incredible happened. He stepped back, away from both doors, and suddenly a third path revealed itself, a hidden passage, invisible to the impatient. Gasps filled the arena. The simulation collapsed. The crucible had not been beaten. It had been outsmarted. The moment of realization. Velez rose from her seat, staring at the screens in disbelief. No Xyrelian had ever done this. Ethan Carter walked out of the simulation chamber, weary but victorious. He met her gaze, his voice steady. Your test wasn't flawed. It was limited by your own thinking. For the first time, Velez did not know what to say. The Xyrelians had believed humans were weak. But weakness was not the absence of strength. It was the refusal to change. And in that moment, she realized, humanity was not inferior. They were something far more dangerous. They were unpredictable. The silence in the Xyrelian arena was heavy, almost unnatural. The crucible had never failed to prove Xyrelian superiority, until today. Commander Velez sat motionless in her seat, her sharp violet eyes fixed on Ethan Carter as he stepped out of the simulation chamber. His breathing was heavy, his uniform stained with dust and sweat, but his posture remained straight. He was not broken. He was not defeated. He had won. The murmurs among the Xyrelian spectators grew louder. Warriors whispered to one another, their faces betraying uncertainty. This was not how today was supposed to go. The human should have fallen in the first trial, collapsed in the second, and been humbled in the final choice. Instead, he had passed every test, not with brute force, but with strategy, endurance, and intelligence. A deep voice finally broke the silence. Impossible. Velez turned her head slightly. It was General Kovar, a high-ranking Xyrelian leader known for his ruthless efficiency. He stood at the edge of the arena, his golden armor gleaming under the artificial lights. His dark brow was furrowed, his tail flicking in irritation. No outsider has ever completed the crucible, Kovar said, his voice carrying the weight of disbelief. He must have cheated. Ethan let out a small breath and shook his head. No, General. I simply played by different rules. Velez studied him carefully. She wanted to believe Kovar's words, that there was some trick, some failure in the system. But she had seen it with her own eyes. The crucible had challenged him, and he had found a way forward, not through power, but through adaptability. And that was dangerous. The weight of a victory. Velez rose from her seat and walked down the steps of the grandstand, her boots clicking against the polished stone floor. The crowd parted as she approached Ethan. She stopped a few feet from him, arms crossed over her chest. Tell me, human, she said, her voice calm but firm, what do you hope to prove with this? Ethan met her gaze. That humanity deserves respect. Velez let out a quiet breath, considering his words. Respect. It was such a simple thing, yet Xyrelians had never seen humans as worthy of it. She glanced at the display screens above, still showing his performance in the crucible. His tactics were unorthodox, his endurance was surprising, and his final choice. That was what unsettled her the most. Xyrelians were warriors, trained to move forward, to choose a path, and commit to it. No Xyrelian had ever thought to reject the choice itself. Ethan had broken the test, not by overpowering it, but by rethinking its limits. Velez's fingers tightened around her gauntlets. "You forced the crucible to fail," she said, her voice lower now, more thoughtful. "Do you realize what that means?" Ethan nodded. "It means your test is not as perfect as you thought." A ripple of tension passed through the watching crowd. A challenge had been spoken, not through violence, but through truth. Velez hated to admit it, but she felt a strange respect for him in that moment. And yet she was also troubled. The fear of the unknown. As a warrior, Velez had been raised on the belief that strength was the foundation of all things. The strong survived. The weak submitted. The Xyrelians had built an empire on this truth. But now, before her, stood a being who had proven that strength alone was not enough. Humans were not physically superior. They were not the strongest, the fastest, or the most advanced. But they were something far more dangerous. They were unpredictable. Velez's mind raced. If this single human could outthink the crucible, what else could humanity accomplish? What other limits could they break? For the first time, she felt uncertain about what the future held. The thought made her uneasy. Kovar's challenge. A sudden clap echoed through the arena, snapping everyone's attention to General Kovar. He stepped forward, his golden armor gleaming under the lights. His expression was hard, unreadable. "Enough debate," he declared. "A single test does not define an entire species. If this human truly believes he is equal to us, let him prove it in battle." Velez turned to him sharply. The crucible was enough. Kovar's eyes narrowed. The crucible is a test of skill. But war is the true test of strength. Let the human face one of our warriors in combat. Then we shall see if he is worthy. A new energy filled the room. The Xyrelians had been uncertain about Ethan's victory, but now a chance for physical proof had been offered. Ethan exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. "Let me guess," he said. "If I refuse, humanity is weak." Kovar smirked. "Exactly." Ethan glanced at Velez. "And if I accept?" She studied him, then looked at Kovar. "You would face one of our champions in single combat. A match to first defeat." Ethan thought for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. I'll do it." The crowd erupted into excitement. A true contest would now take place. But as Ethan turned back toward Velez, he saw something unexpected in her eyes. Worry. She leaned in slightly and whispered, so only he could hear. "You are smart, human. But Kovar has chosen this for a reason. Be careful." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Are you worried about me, Commander?" Velez frowned but didn't answer. Instead, she turned and stepped away. The challenge was set. Ethan had won the crucible, but now he would face a different kind of test, one that might not be about intelligence or strategy, one that might be about survival. The tension in the Xyrelian arena was thick as the challenge was set. Ethan Carter, the human who had defied expectations, would now face a Xyrelian warrior in combat. The audience, once uncertain about Ethan's abilities, now buzzed with excitement. This was what they understood: a battle, a test of strength, a fight to prove dominance. At the center of the arena stood General Kovar, his golden armor gleaming under the bright artificial lights. His expression remained cold as he turned toward Velez. Since this human has passed the crucible, he must now prove himself in battle. Let us see if his body is as capable as his mind. Ethan stood calmly beside Velez, hands in his pockets. He glanced at her. "I assume I don't get to choose my opponent." Velez shook her head. "No, Kovar will choose a warrior for you." Ethan sighed. "Of course." Kovar raised his arm and motioned toward the entrance of the arena. Step forward, champion of the Zarelian dominion. A heavy silence followed. Then, with a slow, deliberate pace, a towering Zarelian warrior entered the arena. The opponent, Dren, the Unyielding. The warrior was Captain Dren, one of the elite fighters of the Zarelian military. He stood over 7 feet tall, his muscular frame covered in dark battle armor. His long tail swayed behind him, sharp claws flexing at his sides. His piercing yellow eyes locked onto Ithan with the gaze of a predator. The audience roared in approval. Dren was undefeated in one-on-one combat. If Ithan had impressed them in the crucible, now they expected him to be humbled. Ithan exhaled slowly. You Zarelians really like making things difficult, huh? Dren smirked, his deep voice rumbling. You impressed them with your mind, human. But this is where intelligence will not save you. Ithan smiled slightly. You sure about that? Dren's eyes narrowed. He did not like hesitation or jokes. Kovar stepped forward. The rules are simple. First one to surrender, lose consciousness, or be unable to fight will be declared the loser. Begin. The moment the words left Kovar's mouth, Dren moved like a shadow. The first strike. Dren was fast, much faster than Ithan expected. The Zarelian closed the distance in an instant, his clawed fist swinging toward Ithan's head. Ithan barely dodged, feeling the wind of the impact rush past his face. If that had connected, he would have been out in one hit. He ducked low, pivoted, and moved back, keeping his distance. The crowd murmured. Dren smirked. You're quick, but running won't save you. Ithan didn't respond. He was studying Dren's movements. His attacks were powerful, but predictable, built on brute strength, not precision. Dren lunged again, this time aiming a kick at Ithan's midsection. Ithan sidestepped at the last second, grabbing the Zarelian's leg and using his momentum against him. He twisted, causing Dren to stumble slightly. The crowd gasped. No one had ever countered Dren so smoothly before. Ithan released his grip and stepped back. He smirked. That all you got? Dren's expression darkened. You'll regret that, human. A battle of styles. The fight continued, with Dren trying to overpower Ithan with raw strength. He launched attack after attack, claws swiping, fists swinging, but Ithan was always just a step ahead. Instead of fighting strength with strength, Ithan used technique, movement, and precision. He dodged. He deflected. He countered at the right moments, striking at Dren's weak spots, the joints, the ribs, the vulnerable areas Zarelians never worried about. The audience's excitement turned into something else. Confusion. Dren was supposed to dominate this fight, but instead he was getting frustrated. Velas watched carefully, her arms crossed. She could see it clearly now. Ithan was fighting like a human, not a Zarelian. Zarelians fought with pride, directness, and aggression. Humans fought with adaptability, patience, and unpredictability. And that was why Ithan was still standing. The turning point. Dren growled in frustration. He charged at Ithan full force, putting all his power into one final devastating attack. Ithan's eyes narrowed. This was his chance. He sidestepped at the last possible second, letting Dren's momentum carry him forward. In the same motion, Ithan pivoted and delivered a sharp elbow strike to the back of Dren's knee. Dren stumbled. Ithan followed up with a precise palm strike to the base of his skull, not enough to cause permanent damage, but enough to send a shock through his nervous system. Dren collapsed to his knees, stunned. His body wobbled. He tried to stand, but his vision was spinning. The audience gasped. Ithan had brought the mighty Dren down. Ithan took a step back and waited. He wasn't going to attack a defenseless opponent. Kovar's voice boomed. Dren, can you continue? Dren tried to rise, his arms trembling, but he couldn't. His vision blurred, his balance unsteady. A long silence followed. Then, finally, he let out a heavy breath and spoke. I yield. The arena erupted in shock. The aftermath. Ethan took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. His body ached, but he was still standing. Velez walked forward, her expression unreadable. "You just did something no human has ever done." Ethan smirked. "I told you. Humanity isn't inferior. You just don't understand us yet." Kovar's jaw tightened, his fists clenched. He had wanted to prove Ethan wrong, but instead, the human had done the impossible. For the first time in Zarelian history, a human had not only passed the crucible, but had defeated one of their best warriors. A realization settled over the arena. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was a threat. And now, the Zarelians had to decide what to do about it. The moment Dren's voice echoed through the arena, "I yield," everything changed. For the first time in Zarelian history, a human had done the impossible. Not only had Ethan Carter defeated their greatest test, the Crucible, but he had also bested one of their strongest warriors in single combat. The once thunderous crowd had fallen into a stunned silence. Zarelians prided themselves on strength, and yet, before their very eyes, their belief in their own superiority had been shaken. Ethan exhaled, feeling the ache in his muscles. He had fought hard, but he had fought smart. Dren had been stronger, faster, and more powerful, but Ethan had been more adaptable, more strategic, and unpredictable. And that had made all the difference. Across the arena, General Kovar stood rigid, his golden armor gleaming under the harsh lights. His fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. His plan had been simple: let the human fail in the most absolute way possible. But instead, the opposite had happened. This was not what Kovar had wanted. A leader's dilemma. Commander Velez watched Kovar closely. She could see the tension in his body. He was furious. She knew why. Ethan's victory was more than just a fight. It was a message. A single human had stood against the best of the Zarelian warriors, and won. And now, everyone in the arena was questioning everything they had ever believed. Ethan turned toward Dren, who was still kneeling. The Zarelian warrior took a deep breath before rising slowly. His pride had been wounded, but he did not lash out. Instead, he locked eyes with Ethan. "You fight differently," Dren admitted, his deep voice carrying through the silence. "Not like a warrior seeking to dominate, but like a hunter waiting for the right moment." Ethan gave a small smile. "We don't always win by being the strongest. We win by understanding the fight itself." Dren studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. Then, to the shock of the entire arena, he extended his arm, a warrior's gesture of respect. A murmur passed through the crowd. No Zarelian had ever offered such recognition to a human before. Ethan hesitated for only a second before clasping Dren's arm. The two warriors locked grips, not as enemies, but as equals. And that single moment shattered centuries of belief. Kovar's response. Kovar took a step forward, his voice sharp. "Enough." The moment of respect was broken as the general's powerful voice echoed through the arena. His golden eyes burned with fury. "Do not be fooled by a single victory. This changes nothing." Ethan turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Doesn't it?" Kovar's expression darkened. "Humans remain the lesser species. Your victory does not rewrite reality." Ethan crossed his arms. "If that's true, why are so many Zarelians looking at me differently now?" Kovar's gaze swept across the crowd. They were whispering, exchanging uncertain glances. Some were still in shock. Others were rethinking their views. A few, like Dren, had already begun to accept a new reality. Humans were not weak. Kovar clenched his fists. This could not continue. He turned sharply to Velez. "This farce has gone on long enough. The council must decide what is to be done with this human." Velez frowned. "Ethan has proven himself. He has earned nothing." Kovar interrupted, his voice like thunder. "You do not see the danger, Velez. If one human can challenge us like this, what happens when others rise? If humanity believes they are our equals, they will become a threat to our dominance. The crowd fell silent again. Ethan's expression remained calm, but his mind was racing. Kovar was afraid, not of him personally, but of what he represented, a crack in the foundation of Zarelian superiority. And cracks only grew larger over time. The council's summons. Vela stepped forward, her voice firm. Then let the High Council decide. Ethan Carter has challenged our beliefs. It is only right that the leaders of the Dominion judge what this means for our future. Kovar's jaw tightened, but he knew he could not refuse. The Zarelian High Council was the supreme authority, and their word was absolute. Very well, Kovar said. Let the human face the judgment of the council. A new tension settled over the arena. This was no longer just about a single fight. This was about the future of humanity itself. A conversation in the shadows. Later that evening, after the arena had emptied, Ethan stood in the dimly lit corridors of the Zarelian stronghold. The battle had ended, but something even more important was about to begin. Velas approached him, her violet eyes studying him carefully. You realize what's happening, don't you? Ethan nodded. Kovar wants to make sure this doesn't turn into a revolution. Velas sighed. The High Council does not change its ways easily. If they decide humanity is a threat, they may choose to eliminate that threat before it grows. Ethan leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Then I guess I have to convince them that humans aren't enemies. Velas gave him a sharp look. If you fail, Ethan, the Dominion could declare war on your people. Do you understand that? Ethan met her gaze. Yeah, I do. She exhaled slowly. And yet, you're still willing to take that risk. He gave a small smirk. You said it yourself, Commander. I fight differently. Velas studied him for a long moment before shaking her head with something almost like amusement. Then let's hope your strategy is better than theirs. The next trial. As Ethan prepared to face the Zarelian High Council, he knew one thing for certain. His battle wasn't over. The fight for humanity's place in the galaxy was just beginning. Ethan Carter stood in the grand hall of the Zarelian High Council, his expression calm but his mind alert. Around him, the towering figures of the council elders watched him with unreadable expressions. Each was draped in long, regal robes, their sharp features illuminated by the glowing blue light of the chamber. The room was vast, built in the heart of the Zarelian capital. Tall, intricate pillars stretched toward the ceiling, decorated with symbols of power and history. This was the place where laws were made, destinies decided, and civilizations shaped. Ethan was not just standing in front of a government. He was standing in front of an empire that ruled hundreds of worlds. And they were about to decide his fate and the fate of humanity. The charges against humanity. A deep voice echoed through the chamber. Ethan Carter, human representative, you stand before the High Council of the Zarelian Dominion. The speaker was Elder Kairos, the most senior member of the council. His silver eyes studied Ethan with quiet intensity. You have proven yourself in both mind and combat, but this presents a problem. Kairos continued. Humans were considered insignificant, weak. Now, you challenge that belief. If one human can defy our traditions, what happens when others follow? Another elder, Velara, leaned forward. Her gaze was sharp. The Dominion has maintained order for centuries. We cannot allow instability. If your people grow stronger, what stops them from becoming a threat? Ethan remained silent for a moment, letting their words sink in. He understood now. This was not just about him. The Zarelians were afraid of change. If humanity was strong, then the Zarelians were no longer undisputed rulers of the galaxy. Ethan finally spoke. So you believe my people will turn against you? Kairos nodded. History has shown that new powers always seek to overthrow the old. It is the law of nature. Ethan sighed. Then you don't really fear humanity. You fear the idea that you're not at the top anymore. The room fell silent. A dangerous proposal. Elder Kovar, the military leader who had opposed Ethan from the beginning, finally stepped forward. His golden armor gleamed under the chamber lights. His voice was sharp. The solution is simple, Kovar said. We end this before it begins. Humanity must be contained, limited. Their expansion must be controlled before they become a danger. The words sent a chill through the air. Ethan clenched his fists. You're talking about oppressing my people before they even do anything wrong. Kovar's expression did not change. It is prevention. The Dominion must protect itself. Ethan shook his head. No, this isn't protection. This is fear. Kovar's eyes flashed, but before he could speak, Elder Kairos raised his hand. Enough. The chamber grew silent again as Kairos studied Ethan carefully. You argue well, human, but words alone will not change the course of an empire. Then, Kairos made a decision that stunned everyone. If you believe humanity deserves its place among the stars, then prove it, not with combat, but with diplomacy. Ethan blinked. Diplomacy. Tyros nodded. There is a world on the edge of our dominion, Valus Prime. 2 of our member species are on the brink of war. If you can resolve their conflict peacefully, then perhaps humanity has something valuable to offer the Dominion. If you fail, then Kovar's proposal stands. Humanity will be restricted. Ethan exhaled slowly. This was it. A chance to prove that humanity was more than just warriors, that they were builders, negotiators, and survivors. Ethan gave a small, confident smile. All right. I accept. Kovar's warning. After the meeting, Ethan walked down the grand halls of the council chamber, his thoughts racing. Behind him, he heard heavy footsteps. Kovar. The Xyrelian general approached, his golden eyes burning with intensity. You may have convinced the council to give you this trial, but do not mistake this for victory, human. Ethan sighed. You really don't like me, do you? Kovar narrowed his eyes. You represent something dangerous. Change. And change is the first step toward chaos. Ethan crossed his arms. Or maybe it's the first step toward something better. Kovar didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned in slightly. Valus Prime is a fire waiting to ignite. If you fail, you will not only doom your mission but also prove that humans do not belong among us. Ethan held his gaze. Then I guess I have no choice but to succeed. Kovar studied him for a moment before turning away. We shall see. As the Xyrelian general disappeared into the shadows, Ethan exhaled. He had won one battle. Now he had to win another, without ever throwing a punch. Mission to Valus Prime. Later that evening, Ethan stood on the bridge of a Xyrelian transport ship. Beside him, Commander Velas watched as the stars stretched before them. You realize how dangerous this mission is, right? She asked. Ethan nodded. 2 species on the brink of war, a fragile peace, and I'm the one who has to fix it. Velas smirked. You asked for this challenge. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, well, I didn't expect to be the galaxy's first human diplomat. Velas turned to him, her expression serious. The council gave you a chance, Ethan. If you fail, they'll make sure humanity never gets another one. Ethan's jaw tightened. He understood the stakes. This wasn't just about stopping a war. This was about humanity's place in the galaxy. Taking a deep breath, he looked at the approaching planet through the ship's viewport. Valus Prime awaited. And the next battle, a battle of words, trust, and diplomacy, was about to begin. The Xyrelian transport ship descended through the atmosphere of Valus Prime, a planet caught in the grip of tension. Below, massive cities stood between vast deserts, their towering structures casting long shadows. The air crackled with unseen energy, a world on the edge of war. Ethan Carter stood at the viewing window, watching the planet grow closer. His mission was clear: prevent war between 2 alien species and prove that humans belonged among the stars, not as warriors, but as diplomats. Beside him, Commander Velas folded her arms. The Ulari and the Xelvar have been enemies for decades. Their peace is hanging by a thread. Ethan sighed. And I'm supposed to make sure that thread doesn't snap. Velas nodded. One wrong move, and we could witness a full-scale war. Ethan straightened. Then I'd better make the right move. The ship landed smoothly in the heart of Phalos Prime's diplomatic zone. As the doors opened, Ethan stepped out, feeling the heavy atmosphere settle over him. He wasn't just representing himself. He was representing all of humanity. The divided leaders. Inside the Grand Hall, two opposing delegations stood on opposite sides of a massive table. On one side, the Yulari, a reptilian species with sharp golden eyes and scaled armor. Their leader, Chieftain Zarkis, stood tall, his clawed hands resting on the table. The Xelvar have stolen our resources and insulted our honor. There will be no peace unless they surrender what they took. On the other side, the Xelvar, an insectoid species with sleek, chitin-covered bodies and glowing blue eyes. Their diplomat, Minister Vexa, hissed in frustration. Lies. It is the Yulari who broke our agreements first. We have done nothing wrong. The room was filled with tension. One wrong word could ignite war. Ethan exhaled slowly, then stepped forward. All eyes turned to him. The human approach. Ethan placed his hands on the table, looking at both leaders. I understand your anger. I understand that both sides feel betrayed. But let's take a step back. Why did your two species agree to peace in the first place? Zarkis narrowed his eyes. Because war nearly destroyed both our civilizations. Vexa nodded. We lost millions. The war drained our resources. Peace was necessary. Ethan nodded. Exactly. And now, you're willing to throw all of that away because of a dispute over territory. Zarkis growled. That Xelvar cannot be trusted. Vexa hissed. Neither can the Yulari. Ethan raised a hand. All right, let's break this down. Instead of focusing on who's right or wrong, let's focus on what both sides actually want. The leaders hesitated. This was not how Xerelians usually handled diplomacy. Normally, disputes were solved through displays of power, but Ethan was different. He was using logic, strategy, understanding. And it was working, unraveling the truth. Over the next several hours, Ethan dug into the real cause of the conflict. He listened carefully, asked questions, and searched for common ground. Finally, he found the key. The dispute wasn't really about stolen resources. It was about fear. Both species were afraid that the other would grow too powerful. The real issue was trust, or the lack of it. Ethan leaned forward. You don't want war. You want security. So instead of fighting over borders, what if we create a neutral zone, one that both sides can benefit from? Zarkis frowned. A shared territory. Vexa hesitated. How would that even work? Ethan smiled. Instead of dividing land, build something together. An outpost where both Yulari and Xelvar can work side by side. Trade resources, share technology. If you rely on each other, you'll have no reason to go to war. The two leaders exchanged glances. For the first time, they considered the idea. It was not Xerelian diplomacy. It was human diplomacy. The decision. Hours later, the chamber was silent. The Yulari and Xelvar delegations whispered among themselves. The decision had to be made. Finally, Zarkis looked at Vexa. The human's idea is unusual, but perhaps it is worth considering. Vexa hesitated, then nodded. If it means avoiding another war, I am willing to try. Ethan exhaled in relief. It had worked. The agreement was signed. A new era of peace between the Yulari and Xelvar had begun, not through battle, but through understanding. As Ethan shook hands with both leaders, he knew this moment meant more than just peace for Phalos Prime. It was proof. Humanity was not inferior. They had something powerful, the ability to adapt, to think, to unite. And the galaxy had just witnessed it. Returning to the High Council, when Ethan stood before the Xerelian High Council once more, Elder Kairos studied him with quiet admiration. You have done what many believed impossible. You have ended a conflict without force. That is, Remarkable. Kovar, standing nearby, looked frustrated but said nothing. He had hoped Ethan would fail. Instead, he had succeeded beyond expectation. Zyros spoke again. The Council recognizes that humanity is more than just warriors. You are diplomats, thinkers, and because of this, we will not restrict your people. Instead, we will observe. Ethan smirked. So we're on trial. Zyros chuckled. Let's call it an opportunity. Ethan met Kovar's gaze. The general still did not trust humans, but he could no longer deny what Ethan had done. Change had begun. A new beginning. As Ethan walked out of the chamber, Velas walked beside him. You did it, she said. Humanity has earned its place. Ethan exhaled. It's a start, but there's still a long way to go. Velas smiled. Then let's get to work. Ethan looked up at the endless stars beyond the Xyrelian city. Humanity had arrived, and they were here to stay.